And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Well, well, hi there, everybody. We didn't see you. How you doing? My name is Morris, and the person giggling in the background is Bryan, and we are your hosts for Dream Idiots, where every week we tell you a couple of stories from history or our own lives or the front pages of the newspapers. Bryan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And hello, folks. We didn't see you come in. No, sorry. All good here. Things are going well. World Series. This won't drop until a few days from now, but game one of the World Series
That
starts
that is right.
in mere moments. So looking forward to that. And apologies to those folks. We had a couple folks reach out to us and say, "Hey, it's really weird and peculiar that we keep hearing ads for Greg Abbott for governor." Yeah, don't vote for Greg Abbott. By all means, vote, but don't vote for anyone that has an R next to their name, especially Greg Abbott if you live in Texas. Because yeah, we don't know why that was happening, but it should now have stopped. So there's no more GOP commercials and no more right wing anti immigration commercials on our podcast. Hopefully.
Yeah, we couldn't figure out why that was happening, except we were railing against it, and it picked up on the keywords and was like, "These guys must like." Anyway,
Right. Straight white men must be conservative. Right.
nonsense. And today's episode drops on All Souls Day. Is that what we decided, Bryan? The day after Halloween?
Indeed.
All right. So I've got a special story for that, but we do have places where you can write to us and say hey or check out our other stuff. And those places are what, Bryan? Because I still don't know.
You can write to us at dreamidiots.podcast at Gmail. Just go to dreamidiots.com. If you want to listen, you can actually listen to the podcast through the website. We're on every single platform out there, pretty much. So I encourage you to like and subscribe and share and shoot us 5 stars on whichever platform you're on. And drop us a line too if you want to say hey or give us a curse word we can present.
Shit, yeah, curse word, yeah. So no updates this week on anything, Bryan. We're gonna maybe do an all update special at some point. That'd be a good way to
could
start off the new year, actually.
could
We should
well do
consider
that.
doing that.
It feels like there must be an update on the ridiculous Caitlin Armstrong murder story from a few weeks ago, because I think that case may actually be going to trial before the end of the year.
Oh, really?
Dream Idiots does true crime, or as one person wrote in and told us, you really should call this show felonious stupidity. So we could change the name. But yeah, so maybe an updates only show down the road, but nothing today.
Okay, I'm going to start us off with a story today that was requested by Bay Area Brad a while back, and it was one that was in the pipeline. So here we go. And for those of you in this area, or for those of you who grew up somewhere else, this is probably going to sound familiar. Here we go. On the outskirts of San Antonio, out where the grickle grass grows, lie the ghost tracks. At some point in the last 70 or 80 or 90 years, depending on who tells the story, a school bus full of children became stuck on these railroad tracks. And for whatever reason, the children failed to exit the bus as a train approached, a train coming by at high speed. Oftentimes, the story tells of a vicious thunderstorm obscuring both sound and vision. Some versions will tell you that the bus driver fled out of fear, leaving the riders behind, or the driver exited the bus to assess the situation and then suffered a fatal heart attack. In some versions, the driver is a nun and the children are her students. This time, the children had fallen asleep after an exhausting field trip, and the bus stalled on the tracks. The nun tried without success to start the engine. The approaching train had no lights, and the inevitable conclusion pulverized the back half of the bus, while the nun was thrown clear. She returned some months later, and out of guilt for all of the dead children, put her car on the crossing and in an act of suicide. And just as the train approached, some explicable force pushed the car up and over the tracks, sparing her life. She passed away many years later of natural causes. When she died, said John R., as quoted in Weird Texas, those at the funeral said they heard the voices of children playing and the voice of one lone adult laughing. Whatever the driver's identity was or actions they may have taken, the results are always the same for the children. All aboard perish when the oncoming train collides with the bus. Modern-day adventurers can experience the same sensation when they visit the tracks, and they follow the following instructions. 1. Drive the car over the crossing so that it rests midway atop the tracks. 2. Kill the engine. 3. Put the car in neutral. And 4. Wait. After a few moments, the car will start moving uphill, over the tracks, and safely down the other side. San Antonio is full of such haunted places. Bryan, these may sound familiar to you. Woman Hollering Creek.
Oh, yeah.
Donkey Lady Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
The infamous and horribly named Midget Mansion.
Yes.
The Alamo has its share of ghosts, as do the
Right,
Bluebonnet Hotel and the Menger hotels.
Mm-hmm.
But none cry out for a field trip more than these ghost tracks. San Antonio historian Mark Lewis Ribzik lists the tragedy at the railroad crossing as the #1 favorite ghost story for the city. For a local teenager, a visit to this lonely part of town is a rite of passage. I went out there most likely before I could legally drive, and certainly took other teens out there while in high school. Even college classmates were not immune from a ghost tracks tour. But you shouldn't visit at any random time. Halloween is popular. Too popular, it seems, when, according to historians Docia Williams and Renetta Byrne, something that amounts to a major traffic jam snarls up an otherwise quiet crossing spot. At the very least, you should visit in the late fall, perhaps the weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas, when the occasional fog rolls across the fields and hills. After dark, of course, winding your way through the back roads. The headlights flash briefly on street signs allegedly named for the dead children of the bus crash. Shane, Bobby Allen, Richie Otis, Nancy Carroll, Laura Lee. You might think this was a simple visit to a place where something dark and tragic once happened, which it may very well be. That is, until the audience participation portion of the evening begins. If you follow the instructions from earlier in the story, handed down from the generation of teens before, you will survive your visit. My friends and I have made more late-night trips out there to the tracks than I can count, always with similar results. Our car gets pushed off the tracks, says Travis T., as quoted once again in Weird Texas. The children who died on these tracks want to make sure that no one suffers the same grisly fate they did. Forward-thinking adventurers may have sprinkled flour or baby powder on the trunk and rear bumper in an attempt to capture tiny spectral fingerprints. Again, from Weird Texas, Audra S. says, I turned and saw big and little handprints in the baby powder on the window. Mark W. has a similar report. We noticed that there were patterns in the baby powder. It had mostly blown off in the wind, but what remained appeared to have the patterns of fingerprints. Now, I will admit, to have faked the fingerprints in the baby powder myself on more than one occasion in an effort to introduce newbies to the ghost track ritual, except for the time my younger cousin went. His mother was actually the one who faked the prints that night. Now, what really happens out there? Bryan, you've been to the tracks. What do you think happens out there?
Gravity, I think, is what happens out there. I think it is downhill, and when you put your car in neutral, it pushes it off the tracks. That's what I think.
Okay.
But I'm a cynic.
It is most likely it's an optical illusion because you do appear to go uphill.
Mhm.
It's what one might call a gravity hill. So here's the thing. There are at least 53 known gravity hills in the United States alone. It's also known as a mystery spot, which is my personal favorite, a magnetic hill, an anti-gravity hill, and so on, where the surrounding layout of the land, I think is the proper term for that, topography, creates an optical illusion of an upward slope. So what you're seeing is not what you're really experiencing. Just the look of it makes it appear as though you are going uphill when in fact you are not. Also, in a recent San Antonio Current.com article, which Bryan, you just gave me a few weeks ago because you knew I was working on the story on San Antonio urban legends, archivist Matt DeWalsh back in 2003 was looking into some stuff, and he pointed out two important things about this particular gravity hill. At some point in the past, Union Pacific Railroad reconfigured that whole area and reshaped the hill entirely. So it has changed in terms of the configuration. I know that you passed that article along to me without reading it, so that surprised me. But for those of you who are more of the less Bryan Treat approach to life and believe that there may be ghosts, I probably fall into that camp. In 2003, Matt DeWalsh traced the school bus story back to not an event in San Antonio, but one in Salt Lake City, Utah. So whatever you may think of the Gravity Hill theory in relation to the ghost tracks legend of San Antonio, way out on the south side of town, the story itself comes from another community. And the tracks have physically changed over the decades. But 1,000 miles or so away from San Antonio, in 1938, a school bus crash did indeed take the lives of 23 of 38 children, plus the driver, aboard a school bus stranded on some railroad tracks. And this did occur on a foggy day in a collision with a train. So, something did happen. And what I always like to say with, well, we don't know what happened. I don't know what happened on that railroad crossing in Utah, but something happened. And I guess what it comes to with me with this is, how do these stories get from one place to another? How do they morph from one community if this did indeed happen in 1938? How do we transplant these tales from the Utah desert, the high desert, to South Texas?
Right.
Well, one way I can think of is by the early 50s, mid 50s. I mean, San Antonio has always been a military town. There's a pretty big Air Force base near Salt Lake City. A lot of transport back and forth with Air Force folks. Stories get told and retold, passed along, and the location changes. When I was a kid, I had a friend who would often visit from southern New Jersey and tell me all kinds of ghost stories. Then I might go to a basketball camp, say in North Texas, pass those stories along. And maybe that kid who lives somewhere in, I don't know, Denton, goes to visit some cousins in Oklahoma. And then they tell the story to friends who live in Michigan, right? And maybe that explains why when we were kids, there was always these stories of, I don't know, poison in Halloween candy or razor blades and apples, where that's only been traced to one case, right? One case, but everybody has a local version. Oh no, so-and-so had the so-called urban legend, the FOF, the friend of a friend story. My one big regret when I was in Utah at graduate school is I never got to take a class from Jan Harold Brunvand, the academic source of urban legends and stories like this. He had retired by then, and he was only teaching one course a year or so. He wrote Baby Train and Other Legends and several academic sources on the creation of urban legends and spooky tales such as this. Several sources for this piece. Driveinvibin.com with an article called Mystical Mile. It's called Gravity Hill, Utah. Mark Lewis Ribzik's excellent San Antonio Uncovered from 1992. San Antonio Current.com's Best Urban Legends in San Antonio article for September 30th, 2022. Wesley Treat, no relation, I'm guessing?
I guess no.
Okay.
Nothing I know of.
Wesley Treat and Heather Shade and Rob Riggs, Weird Texas. That's part of the Weird USA series of books. Your Travel Guide to Texas's Local Legends and Best Kept Secrets, 2005. Highly recommend that series. Dosha Williams and Renetta Burns, Spirits of San Antonio and South Texas, 1993. And Wikipedia, mainly for information on gravity hills, what they are, where they are, and what exactly they do. So there's a little post-Halloween offering of a spooky variety for you. The tale of the dead children of the ghost tracks of San Antonio.
So as far as you can tell, there's nothing that really indicates that any accident really happened on those tracks. There's just the story from Utah.
Well, that's not me. That's Matt DeWalsh, who did the archiving back
Right.
20 years ago. Yeah.
But there's no random, there's no church van or station wagon that could have been blown out of proportion and turned into a school bus. There's no, huh?
No, and I've looked into it off and on throughout the years, and I've never
Right.
found any indication of anything.
Right.
I'd heard about the Utah one several years ago, but never had the gumption, the wherewithal to look it up. But glad this guy did.
Right.
And when I lived in Utah, I didn't know about the Gravity Hill in Utah at the time, so I never went when I was living there. But next time I'm there, I might. It's north of the Capitol building somewhere, so I might pop up there and check it out sometime.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it could well be that that someone saw those the names of those streets, all those names, and just created the story. I guess too. I don't know.
Well, the names on the signposts in the San Antonio place, they're real. They're the names. They're the names of the children of the folks who developed that area.
Oh, they are. We know that for a fact. Okay,
that's what I've always understood it to be. That they're just the names of the kids whose dads were the architects
who built those homes.
Who built the home. And that place is super overbuilt. I mean, not overbuilt, but it is no longer the rural place it used to be when you and I were in high school, when we'd go
right.
A busload of folks to go over the ghost tracks. But but it's still, I mean, you can, once you make that little curve, exactly where you are. You're like, oh yes,
I remember this. Yeah. It's definitely worth a visit, and it's definitely if you go out there and you're a bit of a skeptic and you want to have fun at someone else's expense, do what we always did, which was someone always brings or buys at the corner gas station a small thing of flour, and then be the one who spreads it, and then very very carefully but dutifully put a couple of fingerprints before you get back in the car, because on 2 occasions, I mean I've done the tracks 2 or 3 dozen times probably, but on 2 or 3 occasions we faked fingerprints in the flour, and people were genuinely freaked out because they really thought it was real.
Think about the cottage industry you could build up around that. I mean, if I owned that little stop and go, I would mark up the
bag of flour for $18.
Yeah, exactly. I would mark it up to high heaven. But I've probably been out there probably 2 dozen times since I was 12 or 13. I mean,
right.
It's a thing you do. And then you go out to see where Midget Mansion once stood, and you go out to the old abandoned Hot Wells resort. You go out to these various places that
right.
are allegedly haunted. And you hunt for ghosts. And this is before cable and all this other stuff, and you needed something to occupy your time. To the point where one kid came up and told me, he says, that the field behind your house is haunted, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, that's where the gorilla that wears overalls lives. And I'm like, what do you mean? There's this gorilla who disguises himself as a farmer and drives a tractor around your house at night. And I'm like, I think I would hear that.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, apparently this gorilla would dress up in a farmer's outfit, and he had glowing eyes and to drive a tractor around the field. I never saw him. I don't think it was real.
No, probably not. Call me a skeptic, but
so happy belated Halloween, everybody. There's a spooky little tale.
Happy Halloween.
Halloween.
All right, it's curse word time. You ready?
Yes, I am.
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
All righty. So this week we have a genuine curse word this time around, and
you mean you've been faking it this whole time?
Oh no, this is a real curse word. And sometimes I've been using it as an excuse to introduce other topics, but here it is.
Cock-a-fuego. Cock-a-fuego. Cock-a-fuego.
Okay.
Give it to you more than once, more times than you want it. Cock-a-fuego. It's not a greeting. although it really should be. Back in the 16th century, Sir Francis Drake was a pirate, and he was traveling around the, basically the Americas, from Peru to Panama. He captured a ship called the Nuestra Senora de la Concepcion, and this was his sort of famous prize. He was really, really proud of this boat, and this boat was nicknamed Cacafuego, or the Fire Shitter, or Shitfire for short. It's unclear why it was really called that, but Cacafuegos is kind of slang for someone who is a braggart, which apparently Francis Drake really was. So you can call Donald Trump a Cacafuego, and it would be completely apt. So Shitfire over time was morphed, and the UK later on started using it to name boats, but they changed it to Spitfire, and then later on became the plane the Spitfire. So there you have it, Cacafuego.
I think it's also what Dan Patrick used to yell during Sports Center when a guy would miss like 6 or 7 3-pointers in one game. He's Cacafuego.
Right. That's how that rings a bell. So
Cacafuego, a slam, becomes Spitfire. It literally spits fire and destroys enemy aircraft.
There you go.
It becomes you take a pejorative and turn it into a good torative, I guess. Or
well, I mean, it would have been hilarious if the British during World War II had dozens and dozens of shitfire planes. That'd be incredibly amusing, but probably, the stiff upper lip crowd, not a big fan of that, probably.
Well, there was always a saying when I was a kid, when you're in a bad situation, where someone would say, "Why don't you just shit fire and save matches?"
I have never heard that before. Is it
You've
really?
Never heard that one? Yeah. Well, shit fire and
fire and save matches.
It's where you need a miracle to help you out. Well, we need to shit fire and save matches. So I wonder if that's like
this probably comes from this as well,
or a relation as well. Okay, well, Cacafuego. Okay, Brian. I'll never doubt your curse word of the week.
Ever again. This is hours and hours of research for every single episode. All right. For my little tale this week, you'll have an interesting take on this, I suspect, due to your varied academic background. I'll be curious to see what you have to say about this. We're going to talk briefly about a gentleman named Charles Roland Charlie Douglas, born January 2nd, 1910, in Guadalajara, Mexico, but born to an American family. His father was an engineer. They were assigned down there. Family relocated to Nevada. Douglas graduated from the University of Nevada with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, served in World War II with the Navy, worked in Washington, D.C., helped to develop shipboard radar systems for the Navy for a period of time. And then subsequent to that, relocated to Los Angeles and started working for CBS Radio as a sound engineer. And so he made a sort of amazing and unusual contribution to the audio field at large, to film and video. He was actually awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award, a Lifetime Achievement Emmy in 1992 for his contribution and his technology. So before television even existed, if you went to see comedy, there was no comedy, there was some comedy on the radio, I guess a little bit, but if you saw comedy live, you were accustomed to hearing an audience with you listening to that performance. So when television starts to come around and you have programs like Jack Benny, they're trying to recreate a kind of a comedy club as realistically as they possibly can, right? And so they're wanting to capture laugh and crowd noises and oohs and ahs and even chair creaks and moves, as well, in order to make something that's broadcast on TV sort of sound like you're in a realistic club. The problem, however, which they realized quickly when they're shooting these programs on film and then airing them, is that the live audiences that were there for these performances couldn't really ever be relied upon to laugh at the right time, laugh for the right length of time, because it's comedy, right? It's subjective. They're writing this content, and if you're trying to figure out how things are going to play for a crowd, you can have a guess in terms of how it's going to play and where you think the laughs are, but very often you're going to be wrong. So Douglas notices this problem, and he started to figure out a solution for it using audio engineering. So if a joke didn't work quite right, he basically started tinkering with ways to add additional laughter. So he could extend a laugh if they wanted to chuckle to go on for a longer period of time. He could shorten a laugh if it kind of went too long. He figured out a way to sort of fade it out and make it attenuate in a sort of a natural way that sounded real. So you could sort of mute laughter, etc. And so this technique became known as sweetening. So he would go through, and on stuff that had been shot on film, he would augment with pre-recorded laughter to make the response of a studio audience seem as good as possible, but also seem realistic. Because if things didn't play right, they wouldn't quite seem right. So Douglas's technique early on, it was used basically to sort of augment the response that was actually there. So on Jack Benny's program, they use it quite a bit, but it kind of wasn't really noticed. And there was a little bit of a, not really tongue in cheek. This was a kind of a bit of a secret. They didn't want to divulge that they were doing this, because on some level this seemed unethical, maybe because you're bumping up the laughs that weren't really there. But as the technology progressed, you get into the 50s and into the 60s, and then they also transition from shooting on film to shooting on videotape. There's quite a bit more they can do in post-production to enhance the airing of any given show. So you can add in bumps, you can fill gaps, and then Douglas is being called on more and more and more to augment things and smooth things out so that every single performance seems basically like a comedian or a performance crushed every single time, kind of regardless of how the audience actual response was. So comedian Milton Berle, who was around for a jillion years, and he's not someone whose stuff I found especially amusing, by and large. In some performance, I think it was a appearance on Jack Benny. Berle is there apparently witnessing some portion of a post-production editing session, although later on Douglas starts to hide how he does his process, basically, and so it's unclear to me how Berle is witnessing this. But in this meeting, Berle apparently says to him, well, as long as we're here working on this, that joke didn't really get all we wanted. And so Douglas goes in and really pumps up this guffaw after the joke that had just bombed, and Berle says to him, "See, I told you it was funny." And so they start to embrace it more and more, and Douglas is being asked to basically orchestrate an increasingly high number of audience sounds and reactions, etc. So you get into the 60s, and by then a live studio audience really starts to be phased out, because Douglas has cornered this market and he can do it better. I mean, he can make these sounds as well or better than an actual audience. So just screw the audience. Don't bother with it. It's a gigantic hassle. So we skip the audience completely. And so for many shows, Bewitched, the Munsters, Beverly Hillbillies used his Laff Box, is what it was called later on. LAFF box was his creation. There were a whole bunch of other shows. Andy Griffith, Brady Bunch, MASH, My Three Sons, that had, that may have been sort of less raucous or, constantly funny than something like Bewitched may have been. But it was this man's job to sort of, in a very nuanced way and a practiced way, and working with the producers, figure out, how to play this laugh box essentially like it's a musical instrument, in a way to augment the script, really. But all of his work, at least later on, was hidden. He'd work with the producer and director and say, okay, here's where the laughs are. Here's kind of what we want, and he would go off and do the work, and then come back with the finished product. So you get a little bit later on this. He still has Douglas has basically a monopoly on this very, very peculiar business. There's a guy named Dick Hobson, who's a TV guide writer in the 60s, who said Douglas was his family was the only laugh game in town, and when it came time to lay in the laughs, producers would go directly to Douglas and say, here is, for this joke, I want this type of laugh, this gender, this sort of style. I want more of a guffaw here versus a more of a kind of a titter, subtle laugh here. And they would really, orchestrate is kind of the only way I can think to describe it. Just like a conductor once, or a composer once, cello versus violin versus clarinet. You go through and you say, I want older man guffaw, and then children giggling, or whatever it is, right? And they would do this for tons and tons of these programs, but no one really knew what the device looked like, how it worked, what it was, how he did this, really at all. The device itself is one of a kind. The Laff Box was, the thing stood 2 feet tall. It was secured with padlocks on. I've seen pictures of it. Either,
Oh my God.
I've seen the padlocks on 2 or 4 sides. I forget now. But it had pedals as well. So basically, you played it like a small, kind of like a small Hammond organ, but the keys on it looks like a little like a typewriter. So and there are 4 rows of keys, and then pedals as well. It was called the most sought after but well concealed box in the world. And so when you sat down at this thing, you could watch whatever episode you're watching, and you could, with a series of selectors, select the style, guffaw, giggle, whatever it is, gender, and age of the laugh, and then the foot pedal was used to gauge the length of the reaction.
So you had a sustaining pedal like you would on
yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So inside this box is an array of chuckles, giggles, guffaws, belly laughs, twitters, whispers, all kinds of things. There are a total of 320 laughs. They're on 32 tape loops. So there are 10 laughs to each loop. And each loop is essentially just spliced together like, I judge, like reel-to-reel audio tape, but I assume not like the 1/4-inch stuff that we would have used when we were in radio a million years ago. I assume it was a larger format than that. I'm not really sure, but they have these loops that just that are never ending. They're permanent, constantly queued up, and so you could play them and they would just loop endlessly. But he also had ahs and oohs in there as well, and the sounds of people moving in their seat. Some producers, again, throwing back to the early days of this, really, really liked and insisted that there be that sort of creaky sounds of people coming in and laying down the seat bottom, right, and having those sounds in there as well.
It's like when you listen to old live jazz records and you can hear change being made on the cash register and forks and silverware and drinks and stuff.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And some producers, there was one of the loops he had was basically a 30-second titter loop, which is just kind of what you were just referencing, that sort of whispering in the background. And some producers just wanted that laid down as a bass track behind everything, behind the whole thing. It's just so, because they just insisted that be there, because they thought that really added to kind of the ambiance of it, I guess, or something. He would make a few changes to it every sort of 3 or 4 years. It says he made major overhauls in 64, 67, 70, and then one more time in the mid 70s, where there were a couple recordings that may have gotten a little bit old, being worn out, heard more than once. And so there is well, at one point there's a high-pitched women's giggle that was then replaced with a man's snicker. But they're so, you start to recognize them.
Oh,
and,
yeah, there's this one a guy that was just like, all right.
right. And so occasionally people say, yeah, I guess it sounds like producers would begin to recognize those sounds more than once. Can we massage that? Can we change that? Can we take that out? And so he would make those subtle changes to it. But I know for a fact, the Laff Box was used on 249 out of 250 episodes of MASH, constantly. So it's on there throughout. And having listened, MASH is one of the only shows that I know I watched religiously that I know had the Laff Box on it, throughout. I don't know of any other show I watched a lot that had it besides that one. But I remember, after years and years of watching MASH, starting to get irritated by the laugh track, but also absolutely recognizing the same sound and the same. I mean, this is the same voices over and over and over again. And so toward the end of MASH, and then when I see it occasionally in reruns and it's there, it's just irritating to me as hell. Now that just seems, very, very peculiar that it's there.
The DVD sets have an option to where you can turn that off.
I mean,
And
that's even weirder.
It makes for a totally strange and new viewing experience, because there's pauses in the dialogue,
right?
That just
like,
get the laughter in, and you're like
what should go there?
I like it better. And of course, all of the OR scenes never had laugh tracks in them on MASH.
Right.
That was one of Gelbhardt's rules, that no laughing in the OR. So I mean that's nothing different. It's a much more natural flow of the conversation. But even as a kid, I noticed that, whereas like there was that one goofy laugh from the guy, and there was like the high pitched titter from a woman, and it's almost like the Wilhelm scream. Once you hear that, you can't unhear it, and you hear it everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess that's also why by the 70s you were starting to have shows actually announce such and such, I don't know, One Day at a Time is filmed live before a studio audience, to distinguish between the ones that were actually using the Laff Box.
Right. And I wonder if, because obviously during the 90s, it seems like there are tons of shows. I mean, there are no sitcoms these days that I watched all, but Seinfeld is a show that was absolutely recorded in front of a live audience, but that's also a show that I know they would do many, many, many takes on, because there are, frankly, if you go on YouTube and search on Seinfeld bloopers, the bloopers are funnier than the actual show. But there's no way you can't play the same joke 6-8 times and expect to get a good reaction or a consistent reaction. And so it's like, okay, so now you've recorded an audience the first time. I mean, it seems like that would have to be augmented somehow. There certainly are with digital technology and laptops and all those things. Obviously there's tons and tons, that are done to film a video throughout, and that's fine. I wonder what some of those more modern shows did to address that issue of the fact that the joke works once, but when Kramer comes in again and falls down the second time and the third time, it's not, there's no way that's going to be correct. So I don't know.
Yeah, and there's and then of course uh, Arrested Development ushered in this whole idea of just doing away with that altogether and doing the documentary style
Right.
situation comedy. And then the show, I think you and I talked about this, but there's this show that's in its second and final season right now called Kevin Can Fuck Himself, although they bleep out the F every time.
Uh-huh.
But it bounces back and forth between a serious drama and your standard goofy guy marries a really good looking woman sitcom. And every time the goofy guy's on there, it's in full sitcom mode with laugh tracks and everything.
Uh-huh.
And then when he's off, it becomes this very dark drama. And it really makes you think about, I mean, it's very meta in the sense that the way we construct these different genres for ourselves and all of the artifice that goes into creating that world, and just how jarring really the sitcom world is.
Right.
With this, I mean, who has living rooms that big? You know, I mean, just the inanity of it all that you have to enter into every time, and that suspension of disbelief that you have to embrace every time. But you know, from an oral sense through your ears, that's the first thing you have to do, is accept that Laff Box is part of that world.
Right.
That you're going to accept.
Yeah, it's harder and harder to do. Is, I mean, for kids maybe it's easy, but it's like, wow, it seems so incredibly, I don't know, forced, fake.
I'm trying to think of any sitcoms I actually watch, and I don't think I do. I mean, if MASH is on, I'll watch MASH any day of the week,
Right.
twice on a Sunday. But or
Right.
if it's the original, like Mary Tyler Moore or the Newhart, not the one where he's in the inn, but the one where he's a psychiatrist in Chicago, I'll watch that.
Mm-hmm.
And
those, I think those both have laugh track. I think.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I have to go back and look. So the original Laff Box, I guess had been in storage for a while. It was found in 2010 and was taken on an Antiques Roadshow and appraised and presented. It was the first time anyone had ever seen it. Worth $10,000, but I mean, it's just worth it just to see the inside of it. And there are some videos on YouTube of it being played. You see, you can press the button and it's the various things. So I'll post that online as well. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, and then there's this scene where a bunch of apes are around it and worshiping it, and one throws a bone up into the air and it becomes the monolith. And that strikes me as the kind of thing that maybe should end up in the Smithsonian somewhere, just because of the way it shaped
right
our perception of comedy and what's funny and what's not funny. And because by and large, most sitcoms are just not funny.
Not very funny. No.
Like if I had a dime for every time somebody said, "Well, you're into comic books and science fiction, don't you?" No offense, because there's a couple people who listen to this show. You should watch Big Bang Theory. I can't imagine watching Big Bang Theory. I sat through 2 minutes of the other night by accident and was like, "This is awful. I can't watch this. This is horrible."
Unwatchable.
Yeah, or even the ones like from the '60s that don't hold up are like. As a kid, I used to love Hogan's Heroes, and now I'm like, oh God, this is
yeah. It has didn't age well.
To this day, I have seen one episode of Brady Bunch, one, and I picked the wrong one, I guess, because it scared the shit out of me, and I never watched it again. So,
it's not a good show. Doesn't mean it's not. There's nothing good about it. I mean, it's not funny. It's not inside. It offers nothing as far as I remember watching that fairly often. What? Bobby put too much soap in the washing machine. That's 30 minutes. Okay.
Well, I have a theory that the reason the Brady Bunch house only had one toilet was because Mr. Brady was very territorial and he wanted everybody to see his poop and know that that's his toilet and his territory, and nobody could flush it until everybody had seen it. That is my toilet. That's my house. Where's Jan? Jan, look at that.
It looks like an ampersand.
and then at the very end, the housekeeper Alice has to come in and, okay, can I flush it now, Mister? Yeah, you can flush it now.
But watch it.
Has everyone seen it? Watch it go down. Watch it go down.
So there you
Oh,
have
man.
it. Charlie Douglas and the Laff Box.
I hope I didn't ruin Brady Bunch for anybody, because you really don't want to hear what I think was going on Gilligan's Island. That's cool, Brian. That's the kind of stuff that I love. The background story of media in America. That's I don't think I've ever heard that name, Charlie Douglas, too, because it's one of those things that goes on behind the scenes. You really don't think about that hard. But shit, someone had to invent that thing, right? So
well, yeah, yep. Someone had to do that, and someone eventually I'll probably do one on Foley artists, which is sort of similar but not quite similar.
are those the folks that going back to radio, the ones that would do the special effects, the practical special effects, but
Yeah, so
audio special effects? Yeah.
wrenching a thing of celery for a broken leg, or putting shoes on their hands and doing walking on gravel, and singing in the rain, all those dance moves that had to be the Gene Kelly's shoes in water, then Gene Kelly's shoes on cement. All of that was done after the fact and dubbed in with someone with shoes on their hands making those sounds, and how that evolved.
And a lot of those guys and gals back in the radio days had to do that shit live when they would record shows live. So you'd have them crinkling paper for a fire.
Right.
On the Lone Ranger builds a fire, so they're standing there crinkling paper into a microphone live. I mean, that amazes me.
Right.
And what do you do for a living? I crinkle paper into a microphone live.
Oh, what?
It'll all make sense in the end. Trust me. All right. There you have it. Another episode of Dream Idiots has come perhaps mercifully to an end, but great story, Brian. I love those behind the scenes stuff about how stuff gets media products get made. Hope everybody had a good and safe and fun Halloween, and you're having a traditional and dignified All Souls Day, and that you're having a nice November as we head into the holiday season. We've got lots of good episodes lined up for you. And anything from you, Brian?
I think that's it. Please go online and shoot us 5 stars if you can on whatever platform you're listening, and share our stuff. We'd love to start bumping up our audience even more. So like and subscribe and do those things. And thanks for listening. And we'll be back real soon.
Be good to each other. Thanks.